protest.
Africa just broke the pattern, quietly, decisively, and without asking for permission. On October 10th, 2025, Burkina Faso received a shipment of advanced Chinese weaponry that Western analysts had not anticipated. It wasn't just trucks and cannons rolling into Ouagadougou, it was the sound of an old order collapsing. For decades, Africa was told to depend. Now it's preparing to defend. What appears to be a military deal is actually a declaration. The continent no longer fights with borrowed strength. And what does this mean for the whole continent? Let's find out. Something changed in Ouagadougou on October 10th, 2025. And it wasn't just the sound of engines or the flash of cameras. It was the feeling that the center of gravity in global power had shifted, even if only slightly, toward African soil. For the first time in decades, a West African nation didn't wait for Western permission to upgrade its defense. It did it on its own terms. The delivery of Chinese-made armored vehicles and artillery to Burkina Faso was not a spectacle for show. It was a signal that Africa's patience had expired. This wasn't a donation wrapped in diplomatic language. It was a calculated decision. A country once constrained by dependency, now choosing direction over desperation. 6 VN-22, B-100 5mm fire support vehicles, 4 SR-5 multiple rocket launchers, 6 SM-6/WMA 09 120mm self-propelled mortars, 2 WZ-551 command vehicles, 6 EQ-2050 Mengshi armored trucks armed with laser-guided missile systems, 14 SH-11 22mm howitzers, 16 towed artillery pieces, and a convoy of logistics trucks. Together they represented more than hardware. They represented leverage. For Burkina Faso, these machines were not mere tools of war, but symbols of self-determination, tangible proof that the Sahel could still build its own narrative, even as chaos surrounded it. The timing was precise, almost poetic. Just months earlier, Western security missions in the Sahel were scaling back, citing budget constraints and strategic reorientation. France had withdrawn, the United States had reduced engagement, and European Union funding had dried up under shifting priorities. Yet the violence in northern Burkina Faso didn't pause. Villages were still attacked, civilians still displaced, and young soldiers still buried in silence. When the West stepped away, China stepped forward, not with promises, but with precision. The move was not about ideology, it was about arithmetic. The cost of waiting had exceeded the cost of acting. In the geopolitical marketplace, where loyalty often matters less than leverage, Burkina Faso made a practical choice: partner with whoever shows up when you call for help. And Beijing did not with speeches, but with shipping containers. But this was not just an arms transaction, it was a psychological revolution. Every delivery truck that rolled into Ouagadougou that morning carried an invisible message written across its hull: Africa has options. For decades, the continent had been locked into dependency cycles: aid, reform, report, repeat. Now that loop was broken. The very image of a Chinese delegation standing beside Captain Ibrahim Traoré, not as superiors but as equals, reflected a truth that Western policymakers were slow to admit. Respect, not rhetoric, had become Africa's new currency. And what makes this moment historic isn't only who supplied the weapons, but why they were accepted. Burkina Faso didn't turn to China out of blind admiration or ideological alignment. It turned out of exhaustion from being told what to do by those who never faced its enemies. The delivery was a direct response to years of imbalance, where Western powers dictated the terms of peace while Africans paid the price of war. With every armored vehicle that touched Burkinabe soil, the message grew louder. Partnership must now come with parity. Still, behind the optimism lies a deeper tension. If the Sahel is rewriting its alliances, what happens to the old order built on Western dominance? Can Africa truly forge its independence in a world where power is rarely shared, only shifted? For 2 decades, Western powers claimed to secure the Sahel. They built bases, held conferences, sent advisors, yet none of it stopped the bloodshed. Billions in counterinsurgency funding turned into a revolving door of training missions and withdrawal statements. France's Operation Barkhane collapsed under its own contradictions. The United States turned its eyes elsewhere. And when things got tough, Africa was told to wait, again. Burkina Faso had been patient. It accepted the lectures on democracy, the endless reform roadmaps, and the neatly packaged aid that came with invisible strings. But no nation can fight insurgency with PowerPoint presentations. By 2024, over 40% of the country was outside government control. Villages burned while reports were written in Brussels. Soldiers fought with outdated rifles while foreign consultants debated stability frameworks. The message was clear. The West wanted control without commitment. Then came the breaking point. When Western forces pulled out of Mali and Niger, the entire regional security chain collapsed. The insurgent groups didn't retreat. They advanced. Burkina Faso was suddenly holding a crumbling front line with no backup. And in that vacuum, China appeared, not as a savior, but as a supplier. What Beijing understood was simple. People don't need charity. They need capacity. It offered weapons, logistics, and training, not ideology. For the first time, Ouagadougou wasn't treated like a student in a seminar. It was treated like a partner in strategy. And that distinction changed everything. Western analysts, of course, rushed to call it influence or debt diplomacy. But that's how empires talk when they lose their monopoly on loyalty. In truth, China didn't manipulate Burkina Faso. It respected its choices. And that respect, after decades of patronizing diplomacy, was revolutionary. The West's failure wasn't about resources. It was about arrogance. It kept mistaking dominance for partnership. It was thought Africans would remain grateful for crumbs while the table grew heavier with other people's wealth. But a continent that has learned to survive centuries of exploitation also learns to recognize when the tone of help sounds too familiar. Burkina Faso's deal with Norinco wasn't anti-Western. It was post-Western. It was a statement that Africa can diversify its friendships without needing to justify them.